Fifth and finally, of the 43 years that you spent with the FTNY, a lot of them, a significant chunk of that was spent as a fire officer, different capacities, of course, from lieutenant to captain to chief and so on and so forth. So let's say you get somebody that's just been promoted to lieutenant in the FTNY or any fire department for that matter. What advice would you give a brand spanking new fire officer?
You work for the men. They don't work for you. You work for them. You know, give them your best effort because they deserve it. You know, share your information with them. Look out for their safety and lead them. You know, don't make the mistake of thinking that guys want to be poorly led. They're looking for leadership.
There you go. Simple, to the point, but I love it. So you coming on during that time when guys that were working during the war years were still on, so you still had some guys from that era that were still working in the fire department. And they, I imagine, taught you a lot, along with other people that, in addition to their fire service experience, as I talked about with Chief Jonas, maybe they had military experience too. What were some of the best lessons that still stick with you to this day from your time in probationary school?
Yeah, so that's a really great point. We had some of the probationary fire school instructors were just amazing. I remember our drill instructor, Lieutenant McJunkin, was just he would abuse you, right? He would abuse you in during probie class. But I remember we had a nor'easter in December of '92, and they took our class and brought us to firehouses. And when they did that, while we were probies, before we graduated, and I had the pleasure of working a night tour with him. And you can see he loved us and cared deeply for us. And that was why he was so demanding during probie school. He was like we were only like a week or two from graduating, and there was some flooding in different areas. I wound up working in a firehouse in Queens that night. Like I said, he was my lieutenant for the night. And you could see he was like a proud father of his probies, because it matters. It really matters that you're prepared. And he took that responsibility incredibly serious to training his people. And it was just, that was probably the realization of our probie school instructors. My first realization is that, wow, yeah, they were hard on us. And now they've become, I was like his friend at that firehouse, that night. And then when I would graduate probie school, Steve Humaninski, who was another instructor at probie school, he was in my battalion. He was assigned to Engine 283 in Brownsville. And I would see him. And it was so humbling when you would go on a run and you'd see him and he would come over to you and talk to you and ask you how you're doing. And he was another instructor who was very hard on us. But looking back, I understand why they were hard on us. And as my time in training as both the chief of the fire academy and then the chief of training, I understood the value of our instructors making sure that our probies are the best trained, the best that they can possibly be, because it matters on game day. It matters when you go out the door, because those that we're sworn to protect are relying on us being competent and having the ability to get the job done regardless of what we're called to do. And that doesn't matter if you're a firefighter, if you're a police officer, if you're in EMS. The public wants competent people coming. And that's why those academies are incredibly difficult, because in New York City, we have world-class firefighters, police officers, EMTs, and paramedics. And that's not by accident. That's because of the rigorous training programs that we have to prepare us for our first day on the street, in the firehouse, or on that medical.
Strictly not talking about JFK, but just the housing police / NYPD years. Patrol, of course, in the South Bronx, emergency rescue and housing, ESU, bomb squad. You did a lot. It's definitely a career of significance. It's definitely a career to be proud of. When you look back, if you had to define it in a sentence, how would you define essentially half a lifetime of police work?
Lucky. I mean, I experienced the best, experienced the worst, just had a full myriad of, 360 degrees of everything. great times, horrible times, which I think is part of life. It's like if everything is rosy all the time, you don't know what life is all about. You got to experience some of the crap too. You know, I think it's a full circle of everything, and I'm happy that I ended up where I ended up. And I go to high school reunions, and it's like doctors and lawyers and scientists, and you work for NASA and everything like that, and they want to hear all the stories of what you've done, in the police department and in New York, and where'd you go and who'd you meet, and what'd you do and what'd you see, so I think it was a very lucky, happy, great career, and thank God I was able to make it out, and I'm still here, still knocking.
There you go. You're in a unique period by this point in your career to where now you not only have a lot of time on the job, about 14, 15 years, you have quite a bit of time in the unit. You're closing in on the decade mark around this time. So you're in a position where you can instruct others. Is that what fomented your love of teaching, which would lead to the field later? Did you always love to teach?
So at the risk of the guys beating me up and from the heart, because that's only how I talk, I think a lot of what was interesting about one truck, we might save a puppy from, a tire bin, and all the news media channels are on us. It's not that it's not happening. It's not that it doesn't happen as frequently in 5 truck and 4 truck and 3, 2 or 7 or 8 or 9. I think we always got the attention. Mm-hmm. There'd be 9 people shot in Brooklyn, and there'd be no news media of it. The guys would do an amazing job. And then we'd have, somebody drop their ring in a sewer, and we got it out for them. And, they're putting us on shows, and you got to get on the Today Show. And you got to, So I think we got a lot more of the media coverage. I think the whole city is busy. It's just who has the ball, and whether we're on a large barricade, taking in a lot of units from different boroughs, the rest of the city has to be protected, and we have to protect them. All right. If we send all our resources into Queens, if one truck's left truck only, what if they have a problem? There's only 2 guys there, and we have to support them. Mm-hmm. So I credit a lot of the bosses, the lieutenants, and senior guys. If we didn't have a boss there, we were trained and taught to make decisions that what's best for the unit. Right. Don't make decisions constitutionally. If you want to do that, take a test. But look out for each other, train, and go with that. The collapses, the Bronx get collapses, Staten Island gets collapses. Like I said, I think just the more attention on that way. As far as the teaching, they started tapping into me a little bit when I was still in EMS. We were starting to do community programs, and I was sharing being EMT. I was an EMT prior riding with the volleys out east, and I enjoyed it. And I had a lot of people kind of prodding me. Backed off a little bit. I was teaching a little bit on the outside, grabbing a class here, grabbing a class there. And then when I came into the unit with the strong ESU background, when we went to do our EMT refresher, I was offered to come down and contribute. So I spent from almost my beginning time there, joining into the STS and coming out. I would leave the truck for a week or 2 and go contribute and help teach guys coming in doing refreshers, which was a bit of a dance because here I am, the ink's still wet on my card as a guy in emergency, and I'm teaching these guys with 25, 30 years in the unit, let alone on the job, how to be a medical provider and how to do this. And, they're going to eat me, So I was always patient, and I loved being able to help them and always tell them, like, I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I can actually help you to save your life one day, maybe, or someone else's. And guys were always amazing with me, and they took that. And, if they were talking, playing, going, didn't get it, they would come over quietly. Hey, man, just explain this without everybody seeing. I would never blow up a senior guy like that, especially being the Johnny that I was. I had a strong background in it, and it developed where I kept coming down. And over the years, I became a bit of a staple in the medical training school and EMT school. And it was a pleasure to be part of STS and even as a temporary coming in and out of that. I love doing it, and I love getting out in the truck with the guys after I taught them. Like, I'll see you out there in the Atom car. It's not, well, I'm here. And I always hated that. Those who can't teach always irked me. It definitely runs through, and I'm sure a lot of other instructors will tell you the same thing. Sure. We share. I don't teach. I don't have a degree. I don't have a master's in teaching, but I got a lot of experience. I'm an instructor. I share what I know. And with that comes people teaching me things. You're going to show me something that I don't know that's better, faster, stronger. And it's just always that open mind. And I've been blessed to have a lot of guys that trust in me and what I'm telling them and actually give me the time to listen. And God willing, there are people that walk this earth because of their actions from listening.
The fire service has never stopped for you. Hopping on the rig has stopped, but everything else has kept on going. And that's why I wanted to bring up lithium-ion batteries. And it's timely Fatal fire in Chinatown. 4 people have been killed. 2 people were injured in that. I don't know if the death toll has risen from that fire, but last I heard it was 4. This year alone, 13 people have died as a result of lithium-ion battery fires. It's a big problem nationwide. It's especially a big problem in New York City with the amount and, of course, the unusual situation that not every city has 8 million people living in it, or is 5 cities merged into one. So from your perspective, as someone who lived it, as a boots-on-the-ground firefighter, later fire officer in hazmat for the bulk of your career, and as someone who's still so heavily involved in the private sector, I don't know how else to ask the question. 2-part question. 1, what is going on? And 2, how do you see it from your vantage point? And what can we do? What should we as civilians know?
Difficult question, Mike. Number one, I sit on the U.S. Department of Transportation FAA lithium-ion safety committee, and I've been on there since just before my retirement. So 2018, the pilots union was very concerned about the amount of batteries that they were bringing over from outside the United States, from Asia. And they knew that these batteries were, poor quality batteries, and they classified them as counterfeit batteries. That's what they called them, counterfeit batteries, because they were out of spec. They weren't listed batteries. They didn't go through any testing, made with poor quality materials. So when you make poor quality materials, you're going to wind up having failures. So all of these batteries now are making their way into these consumer products. They got a little bit of time on them, and they are starting to degrade, and we're seeing the results of that now. But the FAA was concerned about these batteries having problems on the planes, on the cargo planes, and on the passenger jets, on the passenger planes in the cabins. So we were talking about draconian regulation, and not we it wasn't practical, but it was brought up that, hey, maybe we should not have anyone bring any type of lithium-ion battery, period. No phone, no computer. Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
It wasn't going to happen.
Yeah,
but
not in today's day and age.
No, but credit to the pilots union for making this aware, bringing this awareness out there. But the reason I bring this up, Mike, is because now this stuff has made its way into the supply chain in the United States of America, and now we're seeing the results of that. We're seeing poor quality batteries, poor quality chargers, poor quality inverters, and we're also seeing the maintenance of these things. What I mean by maintenance is the standard of care. Standard of care of these things. Lithium-ion batteries, I always refer to them as the Goldilocks batteries. Everything needs to be just right. It needs to be just right. If not, you're going to have a problem with it. Look, you leave your phone out in the sun. What does it do?
It overheats. You can't charge it.
It stops processing. It's trying to save itself from going into thermal runaway. It tells you, take me out of the sun. And that's exactly. So they don't even have these good quality BMSs, battery management systems, which look at the state of health of these things. So anyway, it's a real technical subject. I don't want to get too deep into it. But what I'm saying is that these poor quality batteries that are made their way out to the United States, and where it is a problem, and we don't know how to correct it. Right? How do you regulate that? If you go onto not to throw Amazon, but you go onto a website and you can see a battery, an e-bike that's going to cost you $3,000 versus $1,500. Which one are you going to go with?
Well, of course, you're going to go for the cheaper one. That's everyone.
Yeah, it's a socioeconomic problem, right? Yeah. Because the people are trying to make money. You take a lithium-ion battery away from a guy who has a delivery service. He's making 10 deliveries a day with no battery. He's making 40 deliveries a day with the battery. So you're taking away some people's livelihood. It's such a hard balance that the fire department has right now. And it's really hard to regulate.
You get into major case, and I believe, as you said, in the summer of 1993. And it's not too long before you have this case, which you talked about exclusively in a Gold Shields episode, in which it was, I believe, a kidnapping/homicide case involving a Chinese gang, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, this was the King of Clubs case. Now, I was not the case officer, but I was one of a small group of just a few of us in the major case squad who had an area of expertise with Asian organized crime gangs, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and we had been hit with quite a few, several dozen every year, Asian gang-related kidnappings. Usually it was alien smuggling related. And this specific case, there was, we had two separate cases in the office. Two separate detectives had a case of an Asian illegal alien in New York City, just working for a living, trying to make it, who had been kidnapped. Now, the cases were cold. There wasn't much going on, no activity with the people in America. There's a reason for that. But unbeknownst to us at the time, they were both kidnapped along with a third victim by the same crew, this member of the Fukinese Flying Dragons, who I was doing a federal RICO case on with the FBI at the time, but this was a subset of that group. They were a kidnapping group, and they did it quite routinely, and they made a good deal of money because most of those folks didn't have the wherewithal or the desire to go to the police. They would just, they would figure out a way to pay, and they would pay something to save their lives or their family's life. And so the ransom demands were being made to family in China, so our cases were cold. Well, I went out for the weekend to Montauk with some friends, and this was Labor Day weekend, 1995. And as I'm coming back into beeper range, because back then it was beepers, 1995, and my beeper's going off like crazy. It's the Major Case Guard office, all kinds of codes like, 911, call. So I finally get to a payphone, I call. Turns out this case blew up over the weekend. What happened is they're holding these three people in this apartment in Brooklyn in the 6th precinct in Borough Park area. And they killed one woman whose family flat out said they didn't have the money. And they killed her several different ways, and they were very brutal about it. It was really nasty. They wrapped the other woman up, and it was a guy. They wrapped the other woman up in duct tape like a cocoon so she could barely move. And they took the guy out, and they said, we're going to go kill him, we're going to party, and we're going to come back and kill you. So she's laying there right next to the dead woman, and she realizes, I guess they mean it when they say they're going to kill, so I better do something. Figures out a way to worm her body over to the stove, and with her mouth turns on the stove, finds a way with her mouth to get a newspaper and heaves it up on top of the stove. It starts a fire, sends out just enough smoke. Somebody calls 911, the fire department comes. They come through the smoke, they see the crime scene. Now it starts getting unraveled. Who are you? What's your name? I was kidnapped. They called Major Case. That starts unraveling. At the same time, out in the Queens and Nassau County border area near Long Island Jewish Hospital, right off the highway, these guys pulled the car over, grabbed the guy out of the car, and shot him in the head. Now, he lived because the round did what ballistics sometimes will make it do. It just traveled around the outside. It gave him a big headache and a concussion, but it didn't kill him. So he woke up from his being knocked out briefly, walked out, and almost got hit by a truck on the highway. Starts a whole chain of events. So we go into full out mode. Two of these three people are our two kidnapping victims from our open cases. Now we got to figure out, we're racing against the clock. How do we get these folks? Turns out we didn't know it, but they took off. They bolted for the West Coast. Now, the New York newspapers made a big thing of it, the King of Clubs murder, because they put a note down the shirt of the dead woman taunting us, saying we would never catch them. This is a clue to who we are. It was something out of a crime novel, actually. They were really cocky. They figured we would never figure out who they were. They made their way out to California. And at the same time as we were having our kidnapping, the FBI had a kidnapping in Seattle, Washington, Asian related. They had made a couple of arrests. And it turns out at the time, there were these calling cards, AT&T calling card with a number on it. If you use that number, you can go to payphone and call anywhere in the world for as much time as the credit was on the card. The same calling card numbers were used in Seattle and in New York to call the victims. That's how we tied them together. So myself and Billy Oldham, another detective, took a trip out to Seattle. We interviewed their two perps. They told us next to nothing, but we were on at least a path with them. We came back, and all of a sudden, a day or two later, Billy looks at me and he goes, "They're in L.A." I said, "How do you know they're in L.A.?" He says, "I have a snitch in L.A., and they're staying in his apartment." That's pretty good information. So within an hour or two, we're headed out to JFK Airport for L.A. We made our way out there, and we spent probably 5 or 6 days, running around the L.A. area, kicking doors in with the L.A. Sheriff's Office. We ended up making 2 arrests of the 5 perps in the LA area. The other 3 took off, and they went north to a city called Milpitas, California. And due to some interesting phone work, we managed to locate them there, had the locals surrounded, and we grabbed them the next day. These guys, when we grabbed the first 2 in LA, we had to kick a door in because one of them jumped out the back window. And the one guy gets up off the floor, and in front of him on the floor is 17 sets of identification. INS cards, driver's licenses, you name it, for 17 different people who they had kidnapped. They kept all their IDs. So it made our case easy. We found the 17 people and charged them with 17 kidnappings. It was a crazy, crazy case. And it was a real race against the clock because these guys are on the run. And they would have kept going. They had enough money. They made good money. They demanded $38,000 from each victim. So they were doing okay. But that was a crazy case. That was a very crazy case.
And there's always that first moment eventually for any fire officer that's worth his or her weight in the fire service, especially in a department as big and as expansive as the FDNY, where you feel, okay, finally, I got my feet under me. You don't know everything, but you're at least comfortable in the rank. And now that you have a steady command, there's time to hone that skill, and there's time to hone that leadership. Where was the moment in 290 where you finally felt, okay, I feel like I got my feet under me now as a lieutenant?
That's a good question, Mike.
Thank you.
I would say it's probably about a year, right? The more running you do, like over there, obviously, I mean, I had been running around. I was in 102. Like I said, 124. I was running around, but I would say it's probably give or take about a year before you start to feel like anything could come your way where you could handle it, right? Does that make sense? Like there's always going to be an oddball thing that, you're not really sure. I used to laugh all the time. Like, we got an odor, right, in the subway. So now you go down 3 flights into the subway and you're like, you smell something. It's 2:00 in the morning. All the guys are looking at you because you're the boss. And now you're like, I smell something. So now the chief's like, what do we got? And you're like, we got something. I don't know. Like, what do you make? You make it an 18, you make it a 33, you make it, like, what do? Do you keep looking? The guys want to get the hell out of there, right? So you have this balance between, it's not really smoke. It's not this. It's not that. What do you do? So I think that those little things where those little jobs where you're not really sure, it's kind of like the oddball thing. It takes a little bit of time where you feel confident enough to say, see if you get a 10-7, see if you can get more information. I have an order down here. We're going to check for CO, whatever it is. You're going to just, wiggle through it because you're not really sure what the heck's going on. You know what I mean? I had a run in 290 where we got there 3 a.m. and there's a guy there, for electrical thing. And I pull up and there's a guy there with his dog. I'm like, hey, what's going on? Did you call? And he's like, yeah, my dog was peeing on the pole and he got electrocuted. I'm like, yeah, what do you do there? Tell me what you would do there, Mike.
I don't know.
Do you go touch the pole? Right? I'm like,
say a prayer.
Yeah. I mean, what do you do? So I'm like, well, the dog looks all right. You look all right. I'm like, don't touch the pole. You know what I mean? So I'm like, how do you know he was electrocuted? Did you get electrocuted? He's like, no. But the dog, I'm like thinking to myself, oh my God, but I'm saying all these like little calls add up, right, over time. You do 20 of those a day, or even if you're not in a busy place or whatever, running wise. So I think that's about a year, I would say. And then after that, as you put more and more time, and that's the experience thing, I think you earn that, there's no doubt for myself that if I had a guy, an officer who was really calm and cool and didn't waste time and, all of those things, that's what I really looked at as far as that I wanted to be, right? I wanted to be the guys that guys felt so comfortable with whatever I was going to do, even if they didn't like what I was going to say, they were comfortable with that answer, right? And that came, like I've said that before, you still have to be yourself, right? I'm never going to be Captain Murphy, right? I'm never going to be Del Coward. I'm never going to be those guys because it's not my personality, right? So I still have to be myself, but I want to take some of those special qualities of those guys that I remember over time, just that what I like that they did. It made me feel comfortable as a fireman, especially if it's a crappy situation, right? Do I trust this guy enough to stay here or not stay here or go on the tracks or do this or do that, where, you know, I'm over here, but I'm telling you to go over there, right? So I think it's important that you have the trust that you're always looking out for them, and they know that, right? They're going to feel that all the time. I used to say all the time, you know, La Familia, we're always together. It's the family, you know, team. The guys used to make fun of me all the time because they used to be like team, you know, from the movie. I forget what the heck that was with Al Capone, with Kevin Costner.
Yeah.
Team. And then he smacks him with the bat.
The Untouchables.
The Untouchables. That's right.
Sean Connery. Yeah.
Yeah. So team. So that was a big thing for me, is that we were always doing stuff together. Always, you know, we don't never go against the family, right? If you have a disagreement, we could come back and talk about it. But, you know, if I'm a 288, you're in 288, it's 288. That's it. You're in 290, one house, one mission, right? It didn't matter if you didn't agree with the guy. You weren't going against that guy, you know, from another firehouse, right? You're going to talk about it when we got back. But it was one house, one mission. That's what we used to say all the time.